Well, you mentioned the Interdisciplinary Research Institutes as kind of being the backbone of Georgia Tech's research strategy. Can you share a little bit more about how they operate, the kind of work that they do?
Absolutely. So the Interdisciplinary Research Institutes, or IRIs, they are headed by an executive director, which is in this case, actually, it's always been an academic faculty member. There are associate directors that really come from all over campus in GTRI. So from Ivan Allen, Sciences, GTRI, other colleges. And, what I've tasked them to do were really are a few things. And this is how I'm sort of indirectly measuring the advancement of the interdisciplinary research mission here on campus. And the first major task is to build community. And that is actually the most challenging task and the most significant task. And the main reason to do that is to be able to go after larger initiatives. You have to have really a group of researchers that are on deck and that are willing to be led by this executive director. And the reason that is a big deal and not easy is because faculty members are pretty much small business owners. And almost everybody's doing just fine by themselves. And it's you have to convince them that it's worth coming together and partnering and building this community to go after much larger efforts. So you'll see various types of workshops and various types of new initiatives between different IRIs that they push out to faculty. And the goal really is to build that community. In addition to that, the next thing that I'm interested in is really their thought leadership. And we've been saying so much. We've been asking the question really very often about what does Georgia Tech think, and I'm hoping that will be answered by our IRIs and the leaders of those IRIs. So I want to cultivate thought leadership. How are we helping our folks from government affairs? Are we doing op-eds? Are we influencing legislation in terms of the research direction? So what are we doing that's much larger than Georgia Tech and influencing and impacting society on a larger scale? The other piece is, I've sort of shifted them in a direction of school chairs, at least the chairs that are in engineering, and really encouraged them to be much more entrepreneurial and to build resources for the IRIs. I mean, we all know that we're even pre-COVID, we had a very constrained budget, and if we want to do big things, we have to make sure that we can raise our own funds to do some of those things. And that can be from corporate development, but also these large, MRI type proposals, for example. And then as we think about what's the next interdisciplinary area, right? How do we do that? So I've been encouraging them to work together and do lots of really joint projects. So you can imagine a cybersecurity IRI as an example really could sort of work across all the other IRIs, manufacturing and biosciences and AI and everything else, for example, right? Cybersecurity applies to it, right? So let's get folks talking to each other so that we can create the next new area that's really important. And the last area of focus for the IRIs is accelerating technology and transfer and knowledge transfer. So how do we get the stuff that we're doing in the lab? Let's get this out to society and get it out to community. And that works really well. I'm not sure if you know just yet, but as of September 1, technology licensing reports to me. So it's a nice, I've had calls with sponsors saying, hey, here's this slate of things that we're doing that's really interesting. And by the way, I know I can get this out to you, because again, I'm involved in multiple areas.
And maybe writing papers. And now you're talking about the translating that, to industry or maybe to a startup company. And yeah, I'd heard that the licensing operation now reports to you. Can you talk a little bit about, what, how that works when a professor has a good idea or a graduate student has a good idea that's come out of the lab, and we really want to license that idea or license that technology either to a startup company or to industry. Can you say a little bit about how that actually happens?
Absolutely. Yeah. So oftentimes the faculty member will need to figure out is this something that can be protected? Like what type of IP, intellectual property, are they actually generating? And so the good thing about our technology licensing office is they can help them, as well as Venture Lab, which is one of our entrepreneurship units, innovation units. They can help the faculty member really decide, hey, if this might be something that a one-off small piece you want to license to an organization, or you may want to build a company around this. And then once you figure out, make that core decision, and let's say you go down a path of licensing it for a startup or at a company, you will need to determine what the technology is and how it should be protected. And one example is that of protecting the idea and using patents. So our faculty members will file these invention disclosures, which will ultimately result into a provisional patent, and then ultimately result in a utility patent. We often like to find partners along the way as we go through the process. Let's say a company that's really interested in a technology, and that way they would help to offset some of the costs, but they get in early on and they get to see how the technology is being developed and matured. But I think your earlier comment, I completely agree that oftentimes universities are not thought of pushing technology out. And I think not only is it really important from a technology perspective or let's say devices and innovation perspective, but also think it's a way for us to communicate what we're doing here at the university. So I think what our communicators do in terms of getting the research out and describing it is extremely important. But another way of doing that, in addition to doing it via videos and blogs and such, is to actually push technology out. So people, right down 85 know that, hey, this widget that's in your car is powered by Georgia Tech. And that lets people know that we're doing things that will impact them in the very near future.
Well, I know you wear multiple hats, many hats, and one of the other hats that you wear is the executive director of our online master's program in cybersecurity. And we keep hearing so much about cyber threats, cyber attacks, the need for education in that space. Can you give an overview of how unique our master's program is, and share with our audience how exciting that degree program is, and that whole area as a whole is?
Absolutely. So I've been in this role of executive director of the online master's in cybersecurity for about 2.5 years now, and we have an interdisciplinary degree, and it's the approach that we take. I think it's a really the appropriate approach, because cybersecurity is a big problem, and it's an interdisciplinary problem. So we were hoping to craft a degree program that's also interdisciplinary, such that we can develop these cybersecurity experts to address this interdisciplinary problem. So it has 3 different tracks or specializations. One is policy, so that's in the School of Public Policy, run by the School of Public Policy. We also have a cyber physical systems specialization, which is run by the School of Electrical and Computer Engineering. And then we have the InfoSec specialization, which is sort of the traditional cybersecurity, and that's run by the School of Computer Science inside the College of Computing. The program, the MS in cybersecurity degree actually has been around for about 18 or 19 years. It had a different name, but it's actually been around for a very long time. And about 5 years ago, it was expanded to be a much more comprehensive degree program. So before it was primarily in the School of Computer Science. And about 5 years ago, 4 years ago, we expanded it to have these different specializations, these different tracks. Right now we have, I'm really excited to say we have over 1,000 enrollments and close to 900 students at this point. And we just started this program a year and a half. So it's a really big deal. It's super exciting. And I imagine in the next few months we'll actually cross the 1,000 student threshold.
And can you talk about the typical student, since it's an online program? Can you talk about the typical students? Are they real Georgia Tech students? Are they on our campus, or what's a typical student look like?
That's a great question. So the students are they're so diverse that they're not. There's nothing typical about that, which is good. I think that's a wonderful thing. So we have students that the age range, I think this lower bound is right, is like 16 or something. This is a master's program, up to late 50s, right? It's like, wow. Dozens of countries are represented. The average age is about mid 30s, right? So that's very different than our on-campus master's program. And many of them have master's degrees already. Several have doctorates that are coming back to do this master's. These students are absolutely 100% Georgia Tech students, which actually you can, is evidenced by, now in the pandemic. I haven't been on campus in a long time, but I'm sure I am a Georgia Tech faculty member. But they, those students are great. And what's nice about the program is it's people ask me, how does it compare to on campus? And number one, it's the same curriculum. And so when you think about and just sort of take a step back and how these degree programs are created, the faculty essentially own, if you will, the curriculum, and they come up with what makes sense and within various constraints for this degree. But then there are different ways in which a degree can be offered, right? So, one can offer it on campus face to face, which is kind of what I had for my degrees. We have also done what's called a hosted model, where we have faculty members will fly out to various companies and teach a cohort of students. And then we have this online sort of asynchronous mode that we have now, where the lectures are recorded, sort of pre-recorded, and then you have lots of interaction through Piazza, which is this sort of interactive blog type system. And you have sort of an army of TAs, if you will. But the important thing is it's one curriculum. It's the same curriculum that's just offered in different formats, different modalities. It's the same faculty members. So when I was teaching on campus, I would teach Intro to Cyber Physical System Security on campus, Intro to Cyber Physical System Security online. It'll be the same labs, same projects, same exams. So it's the same degree program. And it's actually, it's different. So, one example is, you don't have as much, let's say, face-to-face time with a faculty member. That's true. But there's lots of sort of peer-to-peer learning. And that's because in some of the classes, you'll see that the professor's not the only expert, which is great. And so you'll have people that's worked in industrial cybersecurity for 15 years or 20 years that are taking my class. So they would be additional experts in the class in addition to the faculty members. So it's a same quality of experience, but it's a different experience.
I think that, you touched on a number of pieces there, and that's what I keep hearing over and over again. 20 or 30 years ago, people were talking about, online education, remote education. And I think some of those, for lack of a better term, stereotypes still persist. But in the program, the online masters in cybersecurity and our two other ones, I think the sense is that those kind of stereotypes are just being blown up. The quality is very, very high, and the experience that the students get is very, very high. And can you remind me the cost of the online masters in cybersecurity
Yeah, it's under $10,000 in tuition.
for
So
1 year?
no, so the entire degree is under $10,000 in tuition. The way it's described, it's described that way because each semester there are like semester fees that kind of add on, right? So the longer you stay, there are these fees that accumulate, but the tuition, in terms of for the credit hours is under 10,000. So it's, in terms of ROI, in terms of, quality, for price, it really doesn't get any better than that. One of the milestones I forgot to mention was this summer we had our first graduate. And I was really excited to talk to him. And by the way, how about his name is Raheem? Which I was like, oh, this is great. I like you, buddy. But he's actually a Canadian, and I had a chance to do an exit interview, and I asked him. I said, look, tell me about the program. Give me the good, bad, and ugly. The first thing he said was, it was amazing. It was an amazing experience, and it was a really, really positive exit interview. So it's a nice milestone for the program.
Well, the online masters in cybersecurity is obviously, in a short period of time has become a leading program. And I know that that's leading to other things, thinking even bigger in cybersecurity on campus. And do you want to share? We're recording this at a time when the news is fresh, but I think this will appear at a time when it's a couple months old. Do you want to share the very recent news about thinking even bigger in cybersecurity?
Absolutely. So the field of cybersecurity, and I've been in it for decades now, and what I've observed is and not just me, but others, and you can actually just, as you go to conferences, you see different people coming to conferences and different discussions taking place, which is good. It almost kind of mirrors computer science a few decades ago. But the point is, it's becoming so broad. And, from people that have backgrounds in business and economics and computer science and engineering, mechanical engineering, electrical engineering, policy, all these different areas. So what's happening there is it's really becoming its own sort of standalone discipline. It's kind of graduating. And I think we are recognizing that and trying to get in front of that with this new school of cybersecurity and privacy. So I had the opportunity to be on the committee to help at least shape what we would recommend to you and the other two deans that were involved. And it's exciting, and it's people that were from GTRI, that were from policy and sciences and math, all these different individuals shaping a very, if you will, different vision of a school that we call the School of Cybersecurity and Privacy. So that this is we're in September, and I think it's going to be announced really soon, but it's a big deal. And I imagine that it will, who knows what may happen, but it's one of those areas that if nurtured correctly, it could be something even larger than a school. It's perfect timing because we were also, I think this was the first ranking, I believe this is true, of cybersecurity programs. And U.S. News will report said that we were tied as number one in the field. So it's a big deal. It also is nice to kind of get a nice reinforcement that we're doing the right thing with standing up this School of Cybersecurity and Privacy. But it's really important, and that's probably the natural home for the online masters in cybersecurity program. And you can envision, again, as the faculty think about it, you can envision, undergraduate degree programs in this space, certificates. You can envision various centers, for example, that have different themes associated with it. So imagine like a GTRI having a national defense sort of security themed cybersecurity center that's a part of this new School of Cybersecurity and Privacy. So it's a big deal, and I kind of see it as our cybersecurity IRI kind of graduating to a school.
Well, as you were talking about your background and how you got to where it is you are today, at least in your technical interests, I think you describe yourself as a computer engineer, but we also talked about cybersecurity and your interest there. And a lot of people, I think of cybersecurity as the domain for computer scientists. But is there a difference between computer scientists and computer engineers? That one is a big, occasionally messy kind of a question, but I'm really curious about your take on that.
Yeah, no, that's right, and I agree that it is messy. So in general, my interests are in computing, and which spans software and hardware. It's its own sort of ecosystem. So when you think about computer engineers, at a high level, you would say, well, these individuals may be a bit more focused on sort of the combination or integration of software and hardware. And oftentimes our computer science colleagues, and I don't mean this in a negative way because we all kind of make assumptions. That's what we do in engineering, but there's less focus on the hardware, much more emphasis on the software. So that's kind of how I would separate the two. And you're right, cybersecurity has traditionally, and this is what I was talking about earlier about our conferences and how they've evolved. They used to be very just computer science centric. It's, hey, this database was hacked and how do you secure it? And but now you'll see that they're looking at securing cyber physical systems. And whenever you start talking about physical systems, that's engineers, right? That's engineers. And depending on the physical system is the type of engineer. So it may be an industrial engineer or a mechanical engineer. So you really need to understand basically the physics of a process and be able to understand the engineering or of the process itself and also the computing aspect. So I think it suits me quite well to be a computer engineer that is sort of sitting on the boundary of, in the cybersecurity work that I do, the boundary of the software and the physical system.